Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Free Advice Friday. Looking forward to being back with you again on YouTube for another Friday afternoon live stream and answering your voiceover business and marketing questions as they come up. So, that is what the name of the game is here today for Free Advice Friday. I always like to have something to start with, a little piece of advice, tip, trick, something that we can talk about while I'm waiting for people to jump in and waiting for you guys to get questions ready to ask. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about were some recent changes going on with LinkedIn. And there's two different things that I was going to mention. First and foremost, one of the things that I've always taught with LinkedIn is following hashtags. And so once upon a time in LinkedIn, it used to be that you could click on a hashtag. And when you clicked on that hashtag, it would give you a separate feed where all of the content that used that hashtag was curated. It still does that, which is really nice. But you used to be able to follow those hashtags, which made it a little bit easier to get notifications, and you would see notices in your stream of posts that were from hashtags that you were following, etc. Well, as LinkedIn continues to move away from their hashtag strategy, or at least redevelop their hashtag strategy, one of the things that they have done is they have now removed the ability to follow hashtags. As of the time of this broadcast, you can still click on a hashtag. So you can use hashtags. You can still click on hashtags. You can still get the curated feed of content under that hashtag. You just can't follow those hashtags anymore. So just something to think about as you are working through your LinkedIn strategy. I still think for as long as they will let us, being able to check out those curated content streams under hashtags is still a really valuable lead generation resource. So, for example, if you click on an e-learning hashtag, right? Hashtag e-learning, it's going to give you a separate feed and you're going to see everybody, not everybody, but you're going to see a lot of curated content for people who are sharing under that hashtag e-learning feeds. So there's still some value there, even while LinkedIn makes some changes to its strategy. One of the things that they are doing, and I've talked about this before, but I'll reiterate it since we're discussing LinkedIn. It sounds like they're moving more towards an AI model to try to figure out where the content goes. The way that it worked in the past was they used hashtags as a way of indexing the content. And so the assumption was if you were writing a post and you put 3 or 4 relevant hashtags in that post, that's what the content was about. That's who the content was intended for. And those people who were connected to that hashtag, used that hashtag, whatever, those were the people who would potentially see your content. Now that they have AI, they don't need that form of indexing anymore. So what's happening now is they're leaning more into, or is it, as I understand it, they're leaning more into AI-based search. So what that means is if you're writing a post now, let's just stick with the e-learning example because we were talking about it. Let's say that you're writing a post about e-learning and your voiceover services that you offer for e-learning. In the past, you may have wrote a post that talked about those services and then concluded that post with hashtag e-learning, hashtag instructional designer, hashtag e-learning developer. LinkedIn would see those 3 hashtags and assume, okay, this is about e-learning and this is for instructional designers and for e-learning developers. And it would start to push that content out to those people who used those hashtags, shared similar content, had those job titles, whatever. Now that LinkedIn is not looking at hashtags in the same way, it's actually using AI to read the post, and based on what it reads in the post, it's determining who is the best audience for this post. So, whereas before you may not have actually used the word instructional designer or actually used the words e-learning developer in your post because you were using those hashtags, now you're going to want to probably actually include those words in the written text of your post. So, as you're writing your content for LinkedIn, you need to be thinking about who is this content for? And then you need to be thinking about how do I include some keywords in the actual content itself that would trigger the AI to push this content to the appropriate people. Hopefully that doesn't get too confusing, but that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. The other thing that's going on right now is LinkedIn has made some changes to the algorithm and they're starting to prioritize different types of content. So the selfie content and the sharing your wins and success stories content, it's getting old. And LinkedIn is trying really hard to manage and maintain its identity as a professional network. And so one of the things that it sounds like the algorithm is doing now is it is prioritizing knowledge sharing content over the selfies and the personal win stories. So this might make you nervous because you might think, well, great, now I've got to be a subject matter expert on something, and you're instinctively going to want to start talking more about voiceover. But I would say, no, hold off on that. Expand your definition of knowledge sharing content. Think about knowledge sharing content from the perspective of a business owner, from the perspective of a VOpreneur, from the perspective of a working parent working from home. All of those other different hats that you wear that are still relevant. You could be talking about things that you've learned along the way. I picked up this tip today that really helped me increase my productivity. I found this app that really helped me organize my schedule. I heard this thing in a podcast that I really found insightful, and it helped me approach my business in a different way. That's knowledge sharing content. And that does not require you to be a subject matter expert on anything other than you and running your business. And chances are, if you picked up something that helps you in your business, that is a tip that may help somebody else in their business as well. So I'm not saying exclusively lean into that for LinkedIn. I'm saying recognize that this is one of the shifts that is happening on the platform, and make sure that you are adjusting your strategy accordingly so that you're not just sharing the same old. Because if you notice that you're not getting as many views as you had gotten in the past, or you're not getting as much engagement as you had gotten in the past, that may be the reason why, is because you're not sharing the content that the algorithm is picking up on. So make sure that you are sharing at least, I would say, let's just say that you're posting on LinkedIn once or twice, maybe 3 times a week. At least one of those posts should probably be something that taps into that knowledge sharing content. How can you offer an insight? Now, hey, if you're an expert on something, even better, lean into it, right? I mean, yes, I do go on LinkedIn and talk about marketing, but I'm saying if you don't feel like you are a specific subject matter expert and you don't want to become a coach or anything like that, which is, a lot of people default to that, and then they get nervous about what to share or what they're going to talk about, that's where you can lean into, here's something that I learned. Here's something that I found helpful. Here's something that somebody else shared that added value to my life or to my business or whatever. And that can be part of your LinkedIn strategy now, because there is obviously a value add in that. And with that, what do you guys want to talk about on Free Advice Friday? As always, if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the comments. I just ask if you put a Q beside it before you write your question. That way it makes it a little bit easier for me to see it in the chat once we get going here in the chat. Sometimes things start happening fast and furious, and occasionally I miss things, and I definitely don't want to miss your question if you do have one. Look at this. Here we go. Suzanne has one. I came today because I have a question. Well then, let's see if we can answer your question. Is there a master list or something somewhere to help navigate agents and agencies? Like, how do I know that I'm signing up with a good agent? Okay, this is a really good question. So let's do this. We're going to bring this up here, and we're going to go to voiceactorwebsites.com. Oh, I must have typed that in wrong. Voiceactorwebsites.com. And if we come over here to the free tools, voiceover agent database, this would be a really good starting place. So voiceactorwebsites.com, go to free tools, voiceover agent database. As you will note, this is a very extensive, look, we're only at D. Very extensive list. Going and going and going. And we finally got to the end. There you go. That is a pretty extensive list of voiceover agents. And so I think that would be a really great starting place if you're trying to figure out where can I find a resource. And then one of the ways that you vet them, I think, is by looking at their roster and figuring out, do I know anybody on this roster? And when you see a voice actor on that roster that you reach out to that voice actor and say, hey, what's your experience been like with, and name the agency. And I think that can absolutely work. All right, let's see. David's question. David says, I'm sorry if I'm asking this prematurely. I'm only on Playbook Module 2. Oh, okay. So David's got a question about Playbook. Hang on. The question is continued. Let me see. It says, email marketing. If a lead is cold, let me bring this up. If a lead is cold and I'm reaching out for the first time, do I need to have an unsubscribe opt-out link? Okay. This is a really good question. And I think that this is kind of a gray area. As I understand it, if you are reaching out for B2B purposes and there is a public way to reach out to that company for B2B purposes, that is acceptable. So you don't, my understanding, you don't technically need to have an unsubscribe at that point because you haven't technically subscribed them to anything at that point. Where that becomes a factor, and I wouldn't do this anyway, is if you were just reaching out cold and automatically adding people to your email list where you were going to start sending them regular emails about your business or whatever, that's where it becomes more of a, yes, then you have to have an opt-out. But if you're just sending that initial cold outreach, my understanding is that you can do that. That being said, honor all requests, right? If somebody asks you to stop emailing them, at that point, I make a note in my CRM that they've asked me to no longer communicate with them. And then at that point, I no longer communicate with them. And in my follow-up sequence, so after I send the initial email, in my follow-up sequence, I do have an opt-out option in my follow-up sequence. And so there is a way, if they decide that they are no longer interested, they have the option to opt out at that point. David's talking about Voiceover Marketing Playbook, which is out now. Playbook's available until April the 15th. And I'm going to teach you how to find leads. I'm going to teach you how to do email marketing. Actually, that's a very big part of the course. There are several modules that are dedicated to how to find leads, how to write a really great email, what the structure of that should look like, what your follow-up process should look like. That's all part of what is included in Voiceover Marketing Playbook. The details, if you're interested, at voiceovermarketingplaybook.com. You can learn all about the course, walks you through everything that is included. Lots of testimonials. There's the pricing structure for the different packages. And each one of these packages, the course is the same. It's just what extra add-ons you get. So with Playbook Plus, you get 1 hour of private coaching. With Playbook Complete, it adds 2 hours of coaching, and it adds four additional master classes, which is an additional 8 hours of content. Lots of testimonials, so you can see what other people who have taken the course are saying. Karen Clark, Steve, Des, Dino. There's lots of testimonials all throughout the page as well. But yeah, details on that at voiceovermarketingplaybook.com, and that is available until April the 15th. So again, if you have a question that you would like to ask and get answered, don't be shy. Greetings from Louisville, Kentucky, where the Ohio River crested at 37 feet above flood level. Holy mackerel. Actually, believe it or not, 37 feet means more to me than 11 meters. I know I'm Canadian, but I am still old school when it comes to certain things. I still measure in pounds and feet and inches, or weigh in pounds and measure in feet and inches. Actually, the one thing that drives me crazy, I go into IKEA here and I'm trying to measure a piece of furniture or something like that. And all the measurements on the paperwork are in centimeters. The tape measures that IKEA provides are in centimeters. And I get so angry and I'm like, what the crap is a centimeter? I don't know what a freaking centimeter is. And so I'm at the point now, whenever I leave the house, I actually carry a tape measure with me whenever I'm going for those types of purposes so that I can figure it out for myself, because I can't stand it. So yes, 37 feet, basically a school bus. That's a lot of water. That is a lot of water. Hope you're staying safe, my friend. So what else you guys want to talk about? What can I help you with? Don't be shy for Free Advice Friday. If you have a question that you would like to ask and get answered, by all means, please feel free to type your question into the comments. I am certainly happy to answer as many questions as I can. Whatever you want to talk about on the business and marketing side of voiceover, that is what I'm here for. If there are specific things that you want to discuss, hey, think of it as a free coaching session, right? I mean, you could pay $175 and spend an hour with me asking your questions, or you just come and hang out with me on YouTube on a Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern and join a live stream and ask a couple of questions, and away we go. Tony says, what's the best strategy you can provide for locating e-learning clientele? Good question, Tony. There are companies that specialize in creating e-learning content. So just like there are production studios that specialize in commercial, or animation studios that specialize in animation, or gaming studios that specialize in gaming, there are e-learning production companies that specialize in e-learning. That would be the first place that I would start. When you start getting into larger sized companies, direct companies, Delta Airlines, just picking a random example, larger companies like that, they often will have their own in-house instructional designers or in-house e-learning developers, in-house training department, and will often create their own in-house content. And so there is opportunities when you go direct to companies. So one of the things that I would be thinking about is, are there specific companies that I would really like to work with, or specific companies that maybe I've already got a connection to? Are there specific companies that I bring an expertise to because of my background, my experience, my training, my education, etc.? And so you could reach out to companies like that directly. But again, I think the easiest place to start is reaching out to those companies who specialize in the actual production of e-learning content. And so in that instance, smaller companies that don't keep that in-house, they go to one of these companies and say, we need you to create a course for, maybe it's an HR related course, maybe it's a sales related course, maybe it's a product education related course, whatever the case may be. And that third party vendor then creates that course and delivers it to the company. Those e-learning production companies will often keep rosters of voice actors. I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, we were talking about e-learning and talking about LinkedIn strategies. And I mentioned instructional designers and e-learning developers, two of the job titles that I'm commonly reaching out to in that space. One of the things that I would caution you about, though, when you're looking for job titles, maybe you go into LinkedIn, for example, and you do a search for instructional designer. One of the things that you have to understand is that is a very broad title. So there are instructional designers who absolutely work on video-based education. And there are instructional designers who work on what we would call multimedia-based education. But there are also instructional designers who exclusively work on instructor-led. So that would be classroom prep. There are instructional designers who exclusively work on, textbook based. And so you got to do a little bit of research as well, because if you're reaching out to instructional designers who specialize in, only in instructor-led training, for example, they might not be working in video or multimedia. And so they're obviously going to be much less likely, if at all, to use voice actors. And so trying to do a little bit of research up front is going to help you. So it's not that you can just do a blanket search for, find 1,000 instructional designers, reach out to 1,000 instructional designers. Part of what your process is going to be is finding 1,000 instructional designers, but then figuring out from that list of 1,000 instructional designers, who are the ones that are specializing in specifically in video, who are the ones that are specifically specializing in multimedia, and those would become your priority 1, 2 people that you're going to be reaching out to, leads that you want to be making connections with. Good question. And I still think that e-learning is a lucrative genre. I know e-learning gets talked about a lot as a genre that is going to be cannibalized by AI. And I think there's probably an element of truth to that, but I also think it's an element of nuanced truth. I think that AI is going to probably take the bottom end of e-learning, which for me, that's the stuff that I don't really want to be doing anyway. Like, I don't want to be doing 5 or 8 or 10 cent per word e-learning. It's not worth it. It's too time consuming. It's too much effort for too little return. And so if AI is going to cannibalize that stuff, I mean, that's not really hurting me at this point. So I do think that it's probably going to take that, but I think that's also universal across the board. I think AI is going to take the low end of a lot of genres, and the low end of a lot of these genres, that's not the work that I'm working in either. And so one of the ways that we protect ourselves in that case as voice actors is by making sure that we're not low end voice actors, that we're constantly staying on top of our craft and constantly being able to deliver top quality voiceovers, that our reads are always on point and on trend. That the sound quality that we're delivering is always second to none, that our service that we offer is always second to none. And that's the way that we are going to be able to stay ahead of some of these things. Again, if you have a question that you would like to ask and get answered on Free Advice Friday, please don't be shy. I'm certainly happy to answer as many questions as I can. If there's a question you want to ask, feel free to type it in the comments. You can just put a Q before you type your question, and that makes it a little bit easier for me to see it. What do you want to talk about? What can I help you with? Anything business and marketing related, I'm happy to discuss. Unfortunately, there is no new episode of the podcast this week. It was in the works, and then we had the most nasty GI infection go through our entire house. And so I spent one full night in the ER with my wife because she ended up having to be on fluids. And then the next night, two of the girls got it, and I was up all night going back and forth between the two of them. And then the next night, one of our other daughters got it, and so then I was up all night with her. And then the night after that, I got it, and so then I was up all night with myself. Needless to say, it railroaded my schedule a little bit, and so there is no new episode of the podcast this week, and I do apologize, but I'm sure that you will understand under the circumstances. It was a wild few days in this house, but boy, am I ever glad for that to be over. Dale Preston says, I use Clutch as a search engine to look up video production companies. Which search engine do you recommend for giving the broadcast results for eLearning? I think Clutch is a really great database, and I think Production Hub is another database that you can use for that. Rebecca says, hey, Mark, this is more of a thank you. Last year during one of your Free Advice Friday, I asked if you believed a newcomer voice actor should attend VO Atlanta, and you gave an enthusiastic yes answer. Well, I still stand by that always. I attended this year, and it was absolutely amazing. It was exactly as you said, like drinking from a fire hose of information. Thanks again. Well, I'm so glad that you got to go and have that experience. I think there's a misconception sometimes with newer voice actors that you have to be like at a certain level, and that is absolutely not the case. I think the best of these voiceover conferences, the VO Atlantas, the One Voice in Dallas, Mavo in the DC area, those types of conferences, try really hard to find a balance of content across the spectrum. Stuff for newer voice actors, stuff for intermediate voice actors, stuff for later stage voice actors, more advanced voice actors, whatever. They try to find that balance so that there's always content. There's always something for anybody at any expertise level. And I think with any of these conferences too, the other side of it, ultimately you get out of it what you put into it. And I think if you go into these conferences with just an open mind and a willingness to learn, I can't see a scenario where you have a bad experience at one of these conferences. There's just so much to get out of them. So Rebecca, I'm so glad that you were able to go and have that amazing experience. And hopefully that's got you fired up and lots of new information that you can put into use in your voiceover business as well. Mark says, I've been recording a lot of small market and regional car dealership ads. Is there a good way to leverage this towards national spots? Actually, Mark, this is something I learned from my podcast with Bobby Maxwell. It's actually really hard to leverage it into national. And the reason being is on the local level, you can work for any dealer, right? On the local level, you can be working for a Toyota dealer, and you can be working for a GM dealer, and you can be working for a Ford dealer, and you can be working for a Volvo dealer. But on the national level, you can only work for one. And so if you've got several dealerships going on a local level, and they're in different brands, that is going to take you out of the running probably for national commercial. And again, this is something I learned from Bobby Maxwell. If you go to vopreneur.com, click on the podcast link, And scroll back here a couple of weeks. Bobby Maxwell right here. How to book 300 automotive commercials in a year with Bobby Maxwell. This one is available as well on the YouTube channel. That's what it looks like. Master Automotive with the Queen of Automotive, Bobby Maxwell. It's a really insightful episode, but she talks about the fact that she actually took herself out of the running for national spots because she was making so much off of her local dealer spots that it wasn't financially, it didn't make sense for her to put herself into the running for national. And so that's something that you're going to have to think about, Mark, is there's a potential trade-off there. If you do national, if you land a national, it may cost you some of those regional dealers or local dealers that you're working on. And so you'll have to sit down and do a cost benefit analysis and decide, is it worth the risk? Where would I be best advised to post my availability for services to voice actors, audio production, script, demo creation, teaching, etc.? VA for VO would be one place where you could potentially go and monetize that. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with VA for VO. VA for VO is a service that matches voice actors with voice actors, basically. So there are voice actors who offer their services as virtual assistants. And then there are voice actors who want to hire virtual assistants. And for a voice actor, hiring a virtual assistant in the voiceover space, often that makes the most sense because it's somebody who's already familiar with the industry. And so VA for VO is that matching service. And so you can actually put yourself on their site as a vendor, and they can match you to other voice actors who are looking for your services. And so that would be one of the places where you would potentially be able to do that. The other thing that I would do is I would be keeping an eye out in voiceover groups, do some searches in voiceover groups, go into Facebook and do some searches in some of the different voiceover groups and see, is anybody asking for help with production? Is anybody asking help with script creation? All of those sorts of things. And you could potentially find it in there as well. Tab, look, I told you, we can't be friends. The raisins? Come on. Nobody actually likes raisins. Does anybody actually like raisins? Oh, I can't even say the word. Oh, yuck. My daughter went out a week or two ago and she bought a package of cinnamon buns from the grocery store. This is something that we do not generally have in our house, but she was having this craving and so she goes out and buys these cinnamon buns. And I mean, they are the most gorgeous looking fresh baked cinnamon buns. And I am like, okay, this is something that I would never normally eat. This is something that I will probably regret eating later, but this is something in the moment where I'm going to just do the thing. And I bite into this cinnamon bun and it is loaded with raisins and I nearly gag. And then I understand exactly what happened because my daughter knows that I hate raisins. And so I think she bought those ones on purpose so that I would not eat them on her. And so now she's not allowed to live here anymore. And she's lost all of her driving privileges until she's 25. But, actually, I'm just kidding. We didn't throw her out. But we had a very serious discussion, very serious father-daughter discussion after that. That ain't right. It ain't right. Can I be on P2Ps and still get an agent down the road? Voice actors who sell services for well below GVA rates disqualify themselves from an agent. There's a couple of things to unpack in there. Can you be on pay-to-pay sites and still get an agent? Yes. There's no issue or conflict there, broadly speaking. Are there certain agents who may not consider you for their roster if you are on certain pay-to-play sites? Yes. And that is their prerogative to do so. Is the reason why certain agents may not consider you for their roster because you may be massively undercutting yourself on certain pay-to-play sites? Probably that's a factor. And it's also fair. Obviously, when an agent is working on commission and voice actors are massively undercutting rates, it's, doesn't do anybody any good ultimately. And agents certainly can't make, what's 10% of nothing is nothing if the rates are so bad. So I would say that you would have to be cautious. I would say there is one casting site that is a greater offender than many of the others. And one casting site, which may or may not be based in Canada, which I am not going to specifically name because I am not interested in getting sued. There's one particular casting site which may or may not be based in Canada that many agents will not let you onto the roster for. That is partly because of rates, but it's also partly just because of some of the questionable practices. And agents just don't want to be associated with it, and they don't want to get caught up in the drama of it. And I can't really blame them for that either. And so at the end of the day, we all get to choose our business model, right? And we all get to choose how we run our business and who we run our business with and what vendors that we ultimately decide to work with. And so it is something that you do have to take into consideration, that it could be a factor down the road. But I would say also, if the only way that you are booking work, and I'm not saying this to you specifically, I'm saying generally speaking as a voice actor, if the only way that you're booking work or one of the leading contributors to you booking work is that you are just massively undercutting the industry, you're not doing yourself any favors long term because it's not sustainable. You can't build a long-term sustainable business that way, and you're letting people take advantage of you. And once you set a precedent with lower rates, it's almost impossible to get out of that hole. At least with that client, it's going to be almost impossible to get out of that hole. And the other thing that I don't want to have happen is I don't want to have a bunch of clients who are paying me crappy rates, who are referring me to other clients who will also then pay me crappy rates. Because again, I can't build a business that way. I can't feed my family that way. So it is my opinion that rates should be the last thing that you are competing on, and that you should be so confident in your service and your service should be so good that they want to hire you and they're willing to pay fair market value for you. And I can promise you that there are a lot of companies that are out there, because here's the other thing. There are companies, and this sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually true, and I've encountered it. There are companies that will turn you away for quoting low because it's a value perception. And this has happened. We've seen this on online casting platforms, and the CEOs of online casting platforms have talked about this openly. That it's not specifically, if the way that you're trying to win jobs on online casting is by constantly bidding low, that might actually be costing you more jobs than it's winning you, because not everybody wants the cheapest option. I would rather pay more money and get something better, right? This is why we don't go out and, it's why everything in our house doesn't come from the dollar store. Like, are there some things that we don't care, and so we get it from the dollar store? Yes, and it works great and it's awesome and we love it. But are there other things where we want more value and we're willing to spend more money? Absolutely. And I think voiceover is the same. And so when you are constantly underbidding, if that's how you think you're going to win the jobs, just know that it may actually be costing you jobs because of the value perception. What else? Time to attend some e-learning from my survival job. Hopefully it's not terrible and I can make it back to the stream. Hey, if it is terrible, just let them know that you know a guy who can make it better. What else do you guys want to talk about? What's going on? What can we discuss for Free Advice Friday? What voiceover questions do you have to ask? What voiceover questions do you want to get answered? What are you thinking about? What are you dealing with? I'm making a fancy steak dinner for my wife, my mom, and my mother-in-law tonight. This is my life, by the way. 4 daughters. My mother-in-law is on her way here. She'll probably be here by the time this live stream is done. So she'll be here for the next probably 2 or 3 weeks at least. And then my mom's going to be coming to hang out. So wife, 4 daughters, mom, and mother-in-law. Like, seriously? I need a male dog for companionship. I'm so massively outnumbered in this house most days. Hoo-wee. All right. So what do you guys want to talk about? What questions can I answer for you? Don't be shy. Type it in the comments. That's what we're here for. I am here to answer your voiceover business and marketing questions. There are no strings attached. There are no expectations. I just want to hang out with you guys, see what you're talking about, see how I can help you, see how I can add value. I love doing these Free Advice Fridays because it keeps me sharp. It also helps me figure out what it is that you're dealing with and what are the things that I can do to help you. Helps me come up with ideas for podcasts, for social media content, for YouTube, all that sort of stuff. So I love doing these Free Advice Fridays. All right, let's see. Where are we going? Tab says, I love getting training, coaching, and learning as much as I can, but how do you decide when you need to spend and when you need to just do the work? This is one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself, because I think a lot of voice actors get caught in a failure to launch scenario. And I say that in all seriousness because I've had this conversation with voice actors before, particularly when you're new and you're getting started. It can feel like there's always one more thing to learn. It can feel like there's always one more class to take, one more workshop to attend. If I just do one more coaching session, and it's really, really easy to get stuck in that rut. One of the common themes that I have noticed, and I've had the very good fortune of interviewing some of the most respected voice actors in our industry on my podcast. And the one common theme that ties every single one of those top booking talent together, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what genre they are booking in, is that the training never stops. They are constantly staying on top of their craft, but they're constantly working in their business and doing the thing. And so, yeah, there does come a point where you got to just do the thing. But that doesn't mean that the coaching has to stop altogether. You just can't let the coaching become the excuse for why you're not doing the thing. Does that make sense? I think that's it. It's that you can't let it become the barrier to entry. There comes a point when you have to accept that you're ready. If you have professional demos, and those professional demos were produced by a reputable coach, that reputable coach would not have produced those demos for you if you weren't ready. So just by having those demos, it is a testament that you are in fact ready to go. So it's time to go. And then you make a plan for yourself to periodically pick up a class, a workshop, a coaching session, whatever, as you continue to pursue your goals towards different genres and look to improve in different areas. I'm sending marketing introductory emails for radio stations, program directors. Do you think in that case the custom email template also works? It's been hard for me to find a credible opening line. I am always going to default to personalization is better than not personalizing. I'm always going to default to that. In this particular instance, though, I can understand where there is a struggle. If I was going to do it on a more broad spectrum, I would probably try to personalize by genre. At the very least, try to personalize by genre. And so what I mean by that is the messaging that you send to country radio station program directors is probably going to be a little bit different from the messaging that you send to rock radio producers, program directors. The demos that you send are probably going to be different as well. And so if you can't figure out how to personalize on a station by station basis, at the very least, you got to try to personalize by targeting on a genre to genre basis, maybe. Jody says, what software are you using to stream here? Curious if it's something like StreamYard or another program. I am using Ecamm Live, Jody. I love Ecamm Live. It is Mac-based, so that makes a difference, but it is fantastic. I was going to try to learn OBS. I had downloaded OBS years ago and thought, I'm going to give this a shot. I am not technically smart enough to do OBS, apparently. So then I found out about Ecamm, and I'm a Mac guy, so that made a big difference. It is so intuitive. It is so user-friendly. You can stream to multiple different platforms. And so now I'm using Ecamm, and then I'm also using a Stream Deck. You know, buy a Stream Deck on Amazon for $100 or whatever, because then you can tie the Stream Deck into Ecamm. So like I can push a button and it brings up the Free Advice Friday bug in the lower corner there. Or I can push a button and it brings up the, to ask a question bug. And so I'm doing that. I'm pushing that button on my Stream Deck, which is tied in to Ecamm. I can push another button on my Stream Deck, changes out my slides. So I've been using Ecamm for probably 2 years now, maybe. But I think it's been 2 years, because I think the first time I think I got it to use on the 12 Voiceover Gifts of Christmas live stream a couple of years ago. But anyway, absolutely love it. Fantastic. And super, super easy, super user-friendly. I put a link in the chat, Jody, if you want to check it out. Melanie says, when you receive a response from a company that says they typically use online casting sites and don't typically send auditions directly to to talent, what is a good response? Oh, Melanie, yes, here we go. This is a good one. If they are using online casting and they tell you, I use Voice 123, my response to that would be, hey, that's fantastic. Here's a link to my Voice 123 profile. Please feel free to add me to your favorites. And if you send me an invitation to any job that you're posting, I would be more than happy to submit anytime through Voice 123. And in the event that you're in a pinch sometime and you just need to get a job done quickly, please don't hesitate to keep my contact information on hand and reach out directly anytime. And that's exactly how I would handle that situation. Tab says, do you ever take pro bono work? If so, what's the justification or reason, and when is that a good idea? I've done it a couple of times, and I will do it for things that are really important to me, for causes that I think that are really important to me, for causes that are I think are justifiably so. I think that's a personal thing, right? I think that's a personal thing that every voice actor ultimately gets to decide. I will say, just because it's a charity doesn't mean there's no budget. And I think sometimes that's a misconception. I think actually if you do searches for some of the most, some of these charities, you'll find that they've got bigger budgets than some of the companies that you're probably working with. So don't just say that, just because it's a charity, I'm going to give my work away or whatever. But are there certain instances where I think that there's a case to be made for it? Yes, absolutely. I will be the first person to admit that back in the day, I used to make fun of the concept of, well, hey, look, you could do this for exposure, because exposure doesn't pay my rent, right? That's what I used to say back in the day when I lived in an apartment and I had rent. I still think there's validity to that, but I'm older and wiser now. And I also think that there are certain instances where there is value in exposure. I think particularly of an episode that I did recently with Michael Everhard. And again, go to the podcast and check out the episode with Michael Everhard. There's a story that he tells. This is one here, Profit Sharing in Indie Games, a new approach to voiceover with Michael Everhard. There's actually a story that Michael shares in that episode where he had an opportunity to work on a short film. So this is somebody that he had found on the internet, and Michael was just so enthralled with the work. He just thought it was just beautiful as an artistic piece. And this is a guy who's doing it completely on his own, stop motion animation, No budget, just doing it because he loves it and it's a passion project. And he was making this short film, and Michael collaborated with the guy. And that project is now getting submitted to film festivals. And so in that case, Michael got to work on something that he thought was really cool, didn't get any money for it, but he got the satisfaction of working on a project that he thought was really cool. It gave him a really high quality, high caliber piece of content that he could use for his demo, like for reels, put it in his portfolio. And he is getting credit for the narration in this short film that's now being submitted to film festivals. And so, I think there are different instances where it can be warranted. And I think that that's something that every voice actor ultimately gets to decide. You've learned Nimble, but not OBS. Oh my gosh, OBS was like, what the crap? I just couldn't even be bothered. Ecamm, I didn't even have to learn. Ecamm, I think Kaylee could come downstairs and sign up on Ecamm and just start using it. It's just stinking easy. It's so good. All right, let's see. Have I missed any questions? I don't think so. But if I did, let me know. What else do you guys want to talk about? I can stick around for a few more minutes. I got time to answer a few more questions. If you're enjoying the live stream today, by the way, please do me a favor, hit that like button. I would certainly appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel as well so you can get notified anytime that I go live. You join me on Free Advice Friday. I can tell you right now, I will not be live next Friday. I've got family coming. More family, even more family. My mother-in-law is coming today. I've got even more family coming next weekend. And on Friday, next Friday, I will be smoking a 16-pound brisket. So it's going to be a busy day on Friday next week. So no Free Advice Friday next week. What else? What can I answer for you? What else are you guys thinking about? What questions are percolating in your minds? I always like to say there's no dumb questions. There may be dumb answers periodically, but no dumb questions. What's David Toback got to say? I had to turn away a $4,000 job for a charity after doing the work because after the fact, they wanted social ads in perpetuity and turned down my offer for $8K. Looked them up, operating income of $511 million. That's what I'm talking about right there. Charities does not mean no budget. You would not believe the number of charities that are out there that are operating with budgets of $1 million plus and then crying poor. And so that is definitely something. That's why I say on the pro bono side, I think we default to thinking charitable causes. And look, there's a difference between, the American Cancer Society and like a local charity, a local arm of a cancer support group or something in your own town or whatever, right? Like I think that's why we all say, that's why I say you got to look at it on a case by case basis. But that's why I'm also making the point that it doesn't always have to be in the charitable space, right? And so you got to look at the situation, make decisions based on what's important to you, but don't be manipulated. That is what really the point is on some of this stuff, is don't be manipulated into when somebody comes to you and we're like, hey, we have no budget and we can't do this and we're a charity and blah, blah, blah. Have I done charitable work, small charitable work for receipts, for income tax receipts in the past? Yes, I have, right? So I got to get something out of it. And so that's something to think about as well. Speaking of tax, as a Canadian, what tax obligations or tax forms, if any, do I need when getting paid by a U.S. customer? Periodically, you will have a U.S. customer. And by the way, I'm not an accountant. This is not financial advice. Periodically, you will get asked by a U.S. customer to provide a W-9. We do not provide W-9s as Canadians. We provide what is the equivalent of that, I guess, which would be the W-8 Ben form. And that is a form that you can get, that you can download from the IRS, or, discuss with your accountant as well. Always a good idea to discuss these things with your accountants. But that would be that's the only form that I have ever had to submit, is in place of a W-9, a requested W-9, submitting a W-8 Ben. How do you hold yourself accountable with your time? I've been home a lot lately and I feel like I'm losing my mind. There's an exercise that I have read about repeatedly. I've not had to do it yet because I am actually pretty good about my time, and I do keep track of my schedule pretty tightly anyway because I've got so much to do. But there's an exercise that I have read about that I thought if I ever found myself in this situation, I would absolutely do this. Take a week or take 3 days and build out a little sheet for yourself. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's in a journal or something like that, and put in 15-minute increments from morning to night. And carry that journal with you or carry that little spreadsheet with you. And every 15 minutes for that time window, whatever you decide to do, whether it's, 2 or 3 days or a week or whatever, write down what you're doing. Every 15 minutes, stop and write down. What did I do? What did I do for that 15 minutes? And you will probably be shocked, maybe a little disappointed, maybe somewhat flabbergasted, where your time actually goes when you are not in control of your schedule. And what I mean by not in control of your schedule is when you are not intentionally controlling your schedule. Because of the fact that so much of my schedule is already pre-planned out for me, right? I know when Free Advice Friday is going to be. I know when my podcast interviews are going to be. I know when I have to edit my podcast. I know when my coaching sessions are going to be because they're already pre-scheduled. And so I can kind of sit down on Sunday night and look at my whole entire week ahead and just start filling in the blanks. Okay, these are the things that I need to get done this week. This is what my schedule currently looks like. And so now I just have to fill in the slots to make sure that everything ultimately gets done. And that's kind of how I end up ultimately operating. But if you actually sat down and kept a record for a few days of where your time was going, you'd quickly realize how much of your time is getting wasted on things that probably shouldn't be getting wasted on. It can be a very eye-opening exercise, and it can help you to realize I got to be so much more intentional about what I'm doing with my time. I am also a fan of things like Pomodoro timers are very popular. So let's say that you're going to go on LinkedIn. Great. I'm going to go on LinkedIn so I can send some connection requests on LinkedIn. Okay, set a Pomodoro timer on your desk with 15 minutes on it. And when that 15-minute timer goes off, get your butt off LinkedIn. Same goes for Instagram, TikTok, whatever. There's not a single one of us that is not guilty at some point of going on social media to check one thing or make one post or drop one comment. And an hour later, we're scrolling through fail army videos. I may or may not be talking to myself. And so that's why it's those little things that 15-minute timer goes off and it's like, oh, crap, my 15 minutes is up. I need to get back to what I'm actually supposed to be doing right now. And I think little things like that can make a big difference in helping you to get control of your time and get control of your schedule as well. All right. What else? I got time for maybe one more question. If somebody's got one, don't be shy. Don't be afraid to ask. What can I help you with? That's what I'm here for on Free Advice Friday. Don't forget to check out Voiceover Marketing Playbook, guys. It's available until the 15th. Go to vopreneur.com, click that playbook link right there. Or if you go to voiceovermarketingplaybook.com, you can read all about the course. Everything that's included in the packages is right there. Lots and lots of testimonials. I want to teach you how to become a confident and effective marketer. I want to teach you strategies for finding your own leads, building your own client base, and becoming the consistently working voice actor that you want to be. That is the goal of Voiceover Marketing Playbook. Marketing is the way. And if you're not doing it, you need to be doing it. And I want to be able to help you to do that so that you can grow your voiceover business. So check it out, voiceovermarketingplaybook.com. Adrian says there's an amazing productivity app called TickTick. Oh, good, because I thought you were going to say TikTok, and I'm like, Adrian, get off my show. It is a Pomodoro timer, calendar, to-do list, and Eisenhower matrix organizer all in one. That actually does sound like a pretty amazing app. Well, this is a TickTick is the name of that one. All right, there you go. Thanks for your first answer, but in my case, you could consider Hispanic radios as a genre, right? That depends. Does Hispanic radio play all types? Like, I'm going to plead ignorant here, but are there Hispanic radio stations that focus on, I'm just throwing genres out, country music, ones that focus on specifically on Latin music, ones that focus specifically on pop music, whatever. I don't know. So if there's any way that you could tailor, right, any little bit of direct intentional tailoring that you can do to the message, I think is going to help it to stand out a little bit more, right? And so maybe the value proposition is just simply that you're reaching out to Hispanic stations as a Hispanic talent, and that you're able to bring that to the table. And if that's the case, then maybe you go for it. But if there's a way that you can segment it out even a little bit further, so that if you are going to send slightly more generic messages, they still sound somewhat more targeted and personalized, I think that can make a big difference. Do you have any advice for any direct marketing usages for someone focusing in the animation character games? Thanks. I think that you look independent. I think you start by looking independent. Obviously, if you're in the gaming space, the end goal is to get in with a Blizzard. Or if you're in the animation space, the end goal is to get in with Disney Pixar or Illumination or whatever. Can you go and chase those out of the gate? I mean, sure, why not? We have the internet. Is there a low probability of success doing that? Probably. So you start, I think, on the lower level. One of the things that I think, particularly in the animation space, one of the things that I think that you look at, there are so many different streaming services out there. And every single one of those streaming services is starving for content. There's probably more animation content being created now than at any point in history. And not all of that animation content is coming from Disney or Nickelodeon or, those big players. So start looking through Netflix or Prime or Hulu or, whatever streaming service that you're subscribed to, and just take time to scroll through the animation sections of those platforms and look at the shows and figure out who are the production companies behind the shows, which you can figure out by watching the credits or doing a quick IMDb search, and start focusing in some of those areas. And I think it's possible, like LinkedIn makes it possible for us to connect with those types of people. So I think that would be a place to start. And then on the gaming side, I would say where in indie games, where are the indie games? Go to, is it Steam? That I'm not a gamer, but I think it's Steam that is the one platform where a lot of indie games get published to play. Going through Steam and looking at the games that are there and reaching out to the developers who are in those places. David says, how are you seeing the rates landscape lately? I've gotten a lot of questions lately of talent confused and jobs that are worse than they used to be, money and the usage asks, etc. So for me, I'm primarily working in the non-broadcast space still. I haven't really noticed anything. I'm going to get in so much trouble. When it comes to the usage, I question how much of it is actually on the client and how much of it is voice actors that just don't understand. How much of it is voice actors who aren't willing to have the conversations to explain it. So perfect example of this, I onboarded with a new client a week ago, and we did our first job together. And I laid out the quote based on, we were talking about work in a particular area overall. And so I laid out a quote based on that type of work. And then they sent me the first job. And then I quoted them based on what we had discussed in our onboarding meeting. And then they came back and I provided them with a quote and, a detailed quote of what the usage was, et cetera. And they replied back and said, actually, this particular job is going to be different from what we had discussed. And here's the usage that we are looking for. And so then I wrote them back and I said, okay, no problem. Based on this usage, this is actually what the rate is going to be. And it was a higher rate. And I said, you can use it for this. And then if you want to add this or this later, then I reserve the right to renegotiate at that time for any upcharges. And they're like, okay, perfect. Thanks for making it clear. I appreciate it. And away we went. And this is something that I've been saying for years. And David, you've probably seen this too. When we come from a mentality that the clients are always trying to screw us, we can't sit down. It's so much harder to sit down and have rational conversations about usage. I did not at any point think that there was a perception that my client was trying to screw me by having me quote one usage and then changing their mind or using a different usage. It never crossed my mind. I just thought, okay, the bulk of the work that we're going to do is this type of work, but this first project just happens to be something different. And they're just trying to understand. And part of my job as the voice actor is to help make them understand and to walk them through that process. And when we sat down and had that conversation and everything was cool. And I would say more often than not, that is the scenario. Now, do I have instances where clients have come to me asking for the moon? Yes, of course. I've had those instances. And do I give them, moonshot quotes for that? Yes, absolutely. I do. Does that bring them back to the negotiation table? Sometimes it does. And if we can come back to the negotiation table and say, look, do you actually need all of these things for this much time? And they're like, well, no, not really. They're just asking because maybe they don't know any better. Maybe that's what somebody told them to ask for or whatever. But then when we can sit down and have a rational conversation, sometimes we can work it out. And sometimes they just say no. Well, then they say no, and then they're going to go find some other voice actor who's willing to sign their life away for $200. And too bad for that voice actor. I got a wife and 4 kids. I can't sign my life away for $200. I just think look, there's multiple sides to the equation. But one of the things that I have seen, and I'm saying this coming from a coaching perspective too, because I have rates conversations with people in coaching, even though it's not specifically what I do, but I see a lot of voice actors who are coming from the perspective or coming from the mindset, and this mindset has been created in our industry. They're probably newer talent, maybe a little bit less experienced, and they've been brought to think or assume that the client is trying to screw you when they ask for all this usage. And so as soon as they get a quote, they get offended. Well, now they're offended. And so now they're going to have a lot harder time having a rational conversation with the client because they feel like they feel like they're being taken advantage of. When in reality, that's probably not what was happening. Sometimes it does, no question. But that's probably not specifically what was happening. It could just be that the client didn't know any better or the client didn't understand what they're asking. And that's why it's our responsibility to be able to sit down and have those conversations. And I say this, I've made the analogy before when I'm working with the service provider. Like when I call up a plumber and I ask the plumber to come and do a job for me, I'm counting on that plumber to be able to educate me on what the price is going to be and why the price is going to be that way. I have that expectation of him. It's his profession. He should know. And I think it in the same way, this is our profession. We should be able to sit down and explain to a client, I understand what you're asking for, but this is what you actually are asking for. Maybe you don't realize it. This is why I can't do what you're asking for, and explain it again in a respectful and rational way. And is there somewhere where we can find some middle ground? Like, do you really need this in perpetuity, or do you actually just need it for a year? And sometimes I have those conversations and they're like, yeah, no, you know what? You're right. I really only need it for a year. But somebody told me just get perpetuity. They don't even know what they're asking for. They're just asking because somebody told them to ask, right? And so I think there's a lot of different variables that come into it, but I definitely think part of it we have to own responsibility for, and that is our ability or sometimes inability to have rational rates conversations, because whenever we see a bad rate, a low rate, an unfair rate, an unjust rate, rather than just taking it and saying, how do I make this better? We get our pitchforks out and we get really pissy about it. And then we can't have the rational conversations anymore. And that's not going to help anybody at any point. I don't know if that actually answers what you're specifically asking, David, but we should do a podcast, David. We should do a podcast and we should talk about it some more, because it's been a while since we had a good rates podcast. So I'd be really interested to hear what I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts and what your take are on it. David, by the way, for those of you not familiar, is the genius behind the GVAA rate guide. So, he knows a thing or two about what's going on out there when it comes to rates. Anyway, guys, I got to go cook a fancy steak dinner for my wife and my mom and my mother-in-law. So thank you for joining me on Free Advice Friday. As always, I certainly do appreciate it. Like I said, no Free Advice Friday next week because I will be cooking a 16-pound brisket for Easter. But hopefully the week after that, we'll be back. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for asking your questions. As always, check out the playbook at voiceovermarketingplaybook.com. As always, this weekend, whatever you decide to do, have fun, stay safe, and go find some leads.